What if I told you that the modern world, with its global stock markets, its 24-hour news cycle, and even its revolutions, was built not on grand ideas alone, but on a hot, bitter, black drink? Before the mid-17th century, the social lubricant of choice across Europe was alcohol. People drank beer and ale for breakfast, not because they were party animals, but because the water was often unsafe to drink. The result was a society functioning in what one historian called an alcoholic haze. The main social hubs were taverns and alehouses, places of loud camaraderie, but also drunken brawls and fuzzy thinking. It was an environment of passion, not precision. Then a new beverage began to trickle in from the Ottoman Empire, a drink that sharpened the mind instead of dulling it. This is the story of how coffee woke Europe up and, in doing so, fueled an age of reason. Welcome to 10-Minute History. I'm your host, Jake Sullivan, and today we're diving deep into the revolutionary world of the coffee house. The story of coffee supposedly begins in 9th century Ethiopia with a goat herder named Kaldi. He noticed his goats became incredibly energetic, even dancing, after eating the red berries from a strange bush. Curious, Kaldi tried them himself and felt the same stimulating buzz. The discovery eventually spread across the Red Sea to Yemen, where coffee was embraced as an alternative to forbidden alcohol, earning it the nickname the wine of Araby. By the 1500s, coffee houses, or kafekhane, were springing up in the great cities of the Islamic world, like Cairo and Constantinople. These were the world's first secular public spaces, where men of all classes could gather to talk politics, listen to poetry, and play chess, all for the price of a cup of coffee. When this bitter invention of Satan, as some suspicious Europeans called it, arrived in Europe, it brought this revolutionary social model with it. The first English coffee house was opened in Oxford in 1650 by a man named Jacob, but the real explosion happened in London. In 1652, a man named Pasqua Rossi, who had been the servant of a British merchant living in Turkey, opened the first coffee house in the heart of London. He marketed his new drink as a miracle cure for everything from gout to scurvy, but his most important claim was that coffee would prevent drowsiness and make one fit for business. This was the key. Coffee wasn't just a drink, it was a productivity tool. And London, a bustling hub of commerce and ambition, was ready for it. From that single stall, coffee houses spread like wildfire. By the early 18th century, there were over 500 of them in London alone. They became known as penny universities. For the price of a single penny, you could enter, take a seat, and have access to the latest news, ideas, and conversation. A dish of coffee itself cost an extra tuppence. Inside, the rules were different. A famous list of rules and orders of the coffee house from 1674 promoted civility and sober debate. One rule stated gentry, tradesmen, all are welcome hither and may without affront sit down together. Class distinctions were, in theory, left at the door. Another rule declared that anyone starting a quarrel would have to buy a round of coffee for everyone, a clever way to de-escalate fights. What made the London coffeehouse ecosystem so powerful was its incredible specialization. Different coffee houses became hubs for different professions and interests. It was the 18th century version of choosing your social media feed. Down in the financial district, you had Lloyd's Coffee House, opened by Edward Lloyd around 1686. It became the go-to spot for ship captains, merchants, and maritime insurers. Lloyd provided reliable shipping news, and patrons began a system of insuring voyages by writing their names under the details of the risk. They were literally underwriting it. This informal system, born over cups of coffee, evolved directly into the global insurance market, Lloyd's of London, that exists today. Just a short walk away was Jonathan's Coffee House, the chaotic birthplace of the London Stock Exchange. Here, stock jobbers bought and sold shares in new companies, creating the frenetic, information-driven world of stock trading. But we have to pause and acknowledge a dark reality. The wealth that fueled this new capitalist world was deeply tied to the brutalities of colonialism and the slave trade. The sugar that sweetened the coffee and the tobacco smoked alongside it were produced by enslaved people. The ships insured at Lloyd's were often slave ships, and the companies traded at Jonathan's included the Royal African Company, which held a monopoly on the trade in human beings. The conversations about liberty in London were, in many ways, paid for by the denial of liberty to millions. Meanwhile, in another part of town near Covent Garden, you'd find the literary coffee houses. Will's Coffee House was the kingdom of the poet laureate John Dryden. Aspiring writers would gather there, hoping for his approval. Later, Button's Coffee House became the headquarters for the influential writers Joseph Addison and Richard Steele, who wrote their famous periodicals, The Tatler and The Spectator, specifically to be read and debated in these very spaces. Then there was the Grecian Coffee House, the unofficial clubhouse for scientists of the Royal Society. Sir Isaac Newton and the astronomer Edmund Halley were regulars. It was said that a dispute over a point of geometry that couldn't be settled at the Grecian couldn't be settled anywhere. This network turned London into a massive information exchange, an 18th-century internet made of wood, smoke, and caffeine. For a penny, you got access to newspapers, pamphlets, and journals you could never afford yourself. A literate person might read the news aloud to those who couldn't, spreading ideas to an even wider audience. Coffee houses even served as post offices. Before street addresses were common, you could use a coffee house as your mailing address, and the penny post system used them as drop-off points to create the first cheap local mail service. While London's coffee houses were centers of commerce, the Parisian café became a crucible for political revolution. In 1686, an Italian immigrant opened the Café Procope, an elegant establishment with marble tables and crystal chandeliers. It soon became the headquarters of the French Enlightenment. Voltaire, who supposedly drank 40 to 50 cups of a coffee-chocolate mix a day, was a regular. So were Rousseau and Diderot, who is said to have written parts of his groundbreaking encyclopedia within its walls. Here the talk was less about stock prices and more about the rights of man and the abuses of the monarchy. As the century wore on, these cafes became breeding grounds for rebellion, monitored by a vast network of government spies. The tension finally exploded on July 12, 1789. A young journalist named Camille Desmoulins stood on a table at the Café de Foy in the Palais Royal. Hearing that the king had dismissed a popular minister, he drew 2 pistols and yelled to the crowd, "Citizens, there is no time to lose! To arms!" The mob that formed in that moment would go on to storm the Bastille 2 days later, igniting the French Revolution. An institution that fostered so much free thinking and criticism was bound to face opposition. King Charles II of England grew so paranoid about the seditious talk in London's coffee houses that in 1675 he issued a proclamation for the suppression of coffee houses. He ordered them all shut down. The public outcry was so immediate and so massive that the king was forced into a humiliating reversal just 2 days before the ban was to take effect. It was a landmark victory for public opinion. A more humorous attack came from a satirical pamphlet called The Women's Petition Against Coffee. Pretending to be from the women of London, it claimed that coffee was making their husbands impotent and that men were abandoning their families to whiffle away their time, smoke at one another, and talk nonsense by the hour. While a joke, it highlighted real anxiety about how this new male-dominated space was changing society. And that was the coffeehouse's greatest limitation. It was an almost exclusively male world. Respectable women were barred from entry, meaning this new public sphere was really only open to half the population. By the end of the 18th century, the classic coffeehouse's golden age was fading. The rich retreated to exclusive private clubs, and the institutions born in the coffeehouses, like the stock exchange, moved into their own dedicated buildings. But their legacy was already cemented. The coffeehouse created what the philosopher Jürgen Habermas called the public sphere, a space where private citizens could debate issues and form an opinion powerful enough to challenge the state. It was the practical application of Enlightenment ideals. And its legacy is all around us. The modern coffee shop, the third space outside of home and work, is its direct descendant, though our headphones and laptops often keep us in public privacy rather than communal debate. The internet, with its rapid, decentralized flow of news, gossip, and argument, is the true functional heir to the coffee house network, complete with all its benefits and its dangers of misinformation and echo chambers. Most of all, the deep cultural link between coffee and productive work started right here. When Pasquale Rossi marketed his drink as something to make one fit for business, He set a new rhythm for the modern world. The coffeehouse taught us that caffeine is the fuel of intellectual labor, a lesson that shapes every single one of our workdays. It was more than just a place to get a drink. It was an engine of modernity, a network that connected people and ideas in revolutionary new ways. It democratized information, fueled financial innovation, and provided the stage for political revolutions. It was the simple, powerful idea that when people talk to each other, soberly and freely, they can change the world. So what are your thoughts on this? Could a single type of place have that much impact today? Let us know down in the comments. If you found this interesting or learned something new, please give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe to 10-Minute History for more deep dives. Thanks for listening.